Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Med School Minutes podcast, where we discuss what it takes to attend and successfully complete a medical program. This show is brought to you by St. James School of Medicine. Here is your host, Kaushik Gua.
Welcome to another episode of Med School Minutes, where we talk about everything MD related with the focus on IMG, specifically Caribbean medical students. Today we have a very, very special guest, one of our alumni again. Her name is Dr. Hasnie, and she is an ENT. So for a lot of you, and we've spoken to a lot of students and parents, ENT is actually a subspecialization in surgery. And it's a surgery residency, and she's finishing this up, and she's going to spend some time telling us about the nuances of getting into such a competitive residency program. Well, thank you so much for taking the time, Dr. Hasnie, for joining us on the program. As you know, we usually try to interview a lot of our outstanding and exceptional alumni, and without a doubt, you are one of them. So,
thank you for having me on the show.
Would you mind? Our pleasure. Would you mind giving us an introduction about your background? Let's start from, say, undergrad, med school, residency, and then we'll take it from there.
Yeah, definitely. So I went to undergrad at Wayne State in Detroit. I was actually wanting to do speech pathology in undergrad. So I had a double major in psychology and communication sciences and disorders. My last semester, it was like April during finals, they had us in a clinical class where we actually had our own clinic patient. And after about 2 weeks in that class, I sat down with my counselor and I was like, I cannot play games with crying children for the rest of my life. I can't do it. It's not something that it's going to work out for me. And I had already submitted all of my applications for my master's program at that point in speech pathology. And she asked me what I liked. And it was anatomy and physiology aspects of it. So she suggested medical school, and medical school had been, kind of growing up, had been something that was obvious in the back burner, because I am a, brown people problems. Medicine is definitely kind of pushed on us. So then it was at that point that I considered the Caribbean, and St. James was the only place that I applied to. And I heard back from you guys that I got accepted the day of my graduation. And then I started in September. And and then I finished up. So I started in September of 2013, then came back to Chicago for the majority of my rotations. I did a couple of rotations out in Michigan. And then I started residency in ENT, and now I'm finishing up my 5th year in ENT, and soon going to be starting my fellowship at NYU for pediatric otolaryngology. It's just funny because I didn't want to play with kids, and now I am playing with kids.
But that's awesome. So ENT, a residency in ENT is within our graduates, and we have nearly 700 of them practicing in and around the United States and Canada. It's not super common, and it seems like a very coveted specialization, even for U.S. medical students. And I think the statistic is only about 20% of people who apply get in. So this almost, and coming from a Caribbean medical school, did you actually face any hurdles trying to get in such a coveted specialization?
Yes, definitely. I mean, for one, when I was a student, we didn't have a rotation that was obtainable in ENT. So the one thing that I did, I can be a little persistent, but during my general surgery rotation, there was an ENT who was working at that hospital. And, I made my introduction. I tried to stick around for the surgeries. And then, on my free time, I would go to clinic, or whenever I could get away from the rotation, go to clinic, because it was within the same hospital. And that ENT, who was one of my mentors, actually ended up agreeing to have me do an elective with him. So you guys were able to help facilitate that. And then after that, I did a observership at Wayne State. as well. So I had those two things on my
Okay.
application. I think when I started medical school, I wanted to go into ENT from the get-go. My baby brother has bilateral cochlear implants, so that's why speech pathology and then ENT
Okay.
was kind of like, just
Okay.
a rolling stone from there. But
Right.
definitely lots of hurdles in that sense. But overall, just in terms of when I was applying, people that I knew that were in medicine, they were pretty much like, don't apply. Don't apply to ENT. You are a Caribbean medical student. You don't have much research under your belt. Maybe take 2 years off. If you really want to do ENT, take 2 years off and go do research. Because there are a lot of programs actually, because like you said, even for American medical
Mm-hmm.
students, like ENT is a very competitive field.
Right.
So there are actually ENT programs that take students for 2 years to do research prior to applying. So I was
Okay.
told to go do that. And I thought to myself that, okay, I should at least try. I shouldn't not
Right.
try and just,
Right.
call it a failure from the get-go.
Right.
So I tried and it worked.
Right. And you matched in 2019, if I'm not mistaken?
2018.
2018. Awesome. So I think the moral of the story is just never listen to the naysayers. They, like, most often than not, they don't know what they're talking about. They probably are talking from some sort of experience, and they're not the same person that you are. You obviously knocked it out of the park. You proved them wrong. Did you ever go back and tell them that, hey, what do you how do you like me now?
I actually didn't have to. I think that each person, and again, I don't think that anybody was saying it in a malicious fashion. I think it
No, I
was
get it.
actually
Yeah.
proper advice. And to be honest, like, I'm not gonna lie, like, if students are coming up to me, I would probably give them similar advice, not the same. But
Right.
like you said, every person is different, and I like had my ambitions and I kind of just went for it. And, had I not matched, I probably would have taken the 2 years off and done the research and then reapplied and maybe matched at that point. But yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't have to. I think each one of them came up to me afterwards and said, "Oh my God, congrats. Like, how'd you do it?" Yeah.
That is really phenomenal. And can you tell us a little bit about the ENT residency? First of all, ENT is a colloquial term. It's not the official term. I can't really pronounce the official term. Would you oblige us and tell us exactly what the official term is?
So ear, nose, and throat. And then the same thing with otolaryngology. So oto means ear. Laryngology means like surgery of the throat. And then otorhinolaryngology is when you include the nose. But no one really uses that term anymore just because it's long. So
okay. And
yeah,
but that's
so
a mouthful.
First we shortened it. Yeah.
Yeah.
First we shortened it from otorhinolaryngology to otolaryngology, and now everyone just calls it ENT.
Right. And is this a surgery specialty or
Yes.
Okay. So it's not
Yep.
an ENT specialization is essentially a subspecialty already of surgery.
Correct. Yep. It is a surgical subspecialty.
Okay.
Just like neurosurgery or orthopedics.
Right. But I believe neurosurgery and all of these. So for some reason or the other, the general conception is that ENTs are not surgeons. And I've always wondered why that is.
False conception.
Yes,
that's a
I
very
know.
false conception. Yeah.
And so every ENT, so is there a pathway for people to get into ENT through internal medicine as well? No. So this is just the only way you can become an ENT specialist?
Nope.
All right. And I read that for the United States, not for the U.S. matches, this is not including IMGs.
Everywhere.
So the acceptance rate for U.S. matches for ENT is 23%. So I can only imagine for a Caribbean for an IMG that is probably significantly lower. I mean, if not just significantly, probably dramatically lower.
Yeah, it is. But to my just to that point, I guess, like, I've been on the interviewing side for the past couple of years now, like on the opposite side of the spectrum. And there's actually quite a few IMGs that apply every year, and they're all phenomenal. There are people that have been out in practice in other countries that apply, or people, um, that are uh, that are IMGs, such as Caribbean medical students. So I do see quite a few of them. I'm not really sure what the match rate is in terms of IMGs, but I think last year, I think a total of 4 people were IMGs that matched.
Okay. I mean, and that's really phenomenal. But the thing is that this is an extremely competitive residency. It is probably a lot more competitive than even general surgery. And a lot of
Oh
people
yeah,
don't necessarily,
100%
and
more
especially,
competitive than
yeah,
general surgery.
oh, of course. But a
Yeah,
lot of people, what they don't understand is, especially students coming in and students applying for the match, these are things that they don't necessarily understand, especially when they're getting into the clinicals. They're like, oh, these are things that I want to do. And that's why, I'm asking you these probing questions so that hopefully any of our students who are watching, or
yeah,
any IMG who's watching this, clearly understands that this is not the route, say, for internal medicine. This is actually a surgery specialization.
yeah,
And everybody knows, if you go and tell anybody, hey, if you're planning to go into surgery, everyone's like, okay, you need to have certain grades, you need to have certain scores. And I think it's more so for ENT, because I know a lot of students who have been like, oh, I want to be an ENT. And you know, and I've told them that, maybe you need to work harder, get your scores up a little bit, but probably look at other specialties too. Speaking of matches, this year we've had a fantastic match rate. Uh, just like every year, we usually always have over 70 matches. We're probably one of the largest, non-private equity owned medical schools. But this year, it's been phenomenal. We've had an 80% first-time match rate, or nearly an 80% first-time match rate. And
that's
we've had
amazing.
several students who matched into surgery. And that's when we started talking about your specialization. And a lot of our students who actually even matched or were going through the process, they were like, hey, you know what, I didn't even think about ENT. I want to learn more about ENT. And that's when we were like, you know what, St. James has alumni who is specializing in ENT. So for a student like that, who, you know good student, good grades, what advice would you give them to get into the ENT specialization?
I think that if they're interested in ENT, they need to. I'm not sure if the school currently has an ENT rotation that they can provide, but I definitely think getting exposure into the field, because, like you said, I think people carry a misconception of what ENT is. And I think that the best way to actually see if it's something you want to do is by doing a rotation, because what people don't realize is we do ginormous head and neck cancer surgeries that last sometimes up to 20 some hours, and free flaps, and and then obviously we do the basics of tubes, tonsils, all of that stuff. But there's so much more to ENT, and people do have that misconception that it's like more like an allergist than anything else, or like a sinus doctor, which is a big part of it, don't get me wrong, but there's so much more from that surgical standpoint. And then at that point, if they are interested, again, obtaining a rotation, whether it's through the school or going out and making the effort themselves, because I had to do that, and you guys were very supportive, and I was able to find multiple rotations that I was able to set up by myself. It wasn't just ENT. I set up a critical care rotation by myself, a medicine sub-I, a nephrology rotation, and you guys were obviously very supportive with it. But I think making that extra effort, when you're on your general surgery rotation, see if there's an ENT surgeon that you can shadow. And I think just overall,
Okay.
like, putting in effort in all of your rotations definitely makes the difference,
Uh,
because people everywhere know each other, right? Like, so if you
okay.
were that medical student on your general surgery rotation that was like hiding in a corner, people will know, because people are not going to be hesitant to reach out when they see your application and call up like your program director for wherever you did your general surgery rotation and be like, hey, so how was that student? We don't hesitate to do that. No one does. So I think, like,
Okay.
being a good student overall on your rotations, putting in the effort, coming in early, writing the vitals, or like when you're in a case, asking, hey, can I make that cut? Hey, can I hold that camera? Like be proactive with those things. Make sure that you introduce yourself, like the scrub tech, the anesthesiologist, the nurse anesthetist. Everyone should know your name, and you should be friendly and like actually want to be there. I think those things very much so make a difference. Obtaining good letters when it comes to applications, going out of your way. So when I applied, obviously I had that fear that like, what if I don't match the ENT? And I was, calling all of the program coordinators like on a weekly basis, being like, hey, just want to let you know my application's in there. Like, take a look at it, because you know what? They might remember your names.
Right.
Make the phone calls, send emails to the program directors and the program coordinators, because if they remember your name and they see it on their desk, they're going to be more, just subconsciously even, they're going to be more likely to pick it up and be like, all right, in the okay pile, like interview pile. So I think those things like, during application season definitely make a difference, regardless of what specialty you want to go into.
Okay. So I have two follow-up questions. One is, as far as scores are concerned, I mean, obviously USMLE is pass failed step 1 now, but for step 2, typically ballpark, what, especially since you said you're on the other side now and you're actually doing this selection, what kind of scores are you guys looking at for applicants? Is there a range? Is there a set score? Are you just looking at personality? What are you guys looking at?
So to be completely honest, I don't think that scores matter, except that for higher subspecialties, there's a cutoff, right? So let's say that like we get 300 applications. Of those 300 applications, depending on which program you're at, every program's a little bit different, but each program has like a cutoff. So of those 300 applications, they'll see who matches their cutoff. So let's say a program's cutoff is 220, right? Everybody below 220 is automatically out. After that, then it's just like, then it doesn't matter. But as long as you meet that program's cutoff, it does. That's all you need to do to get on the desk, so that way they can either say yes or no to your application. But after that cutoff is met, then scores don't matter. It is personality during the interview, but that's hard to gauge beforehand, right? So it's your recommendation letters are a big, big, big deal. Big deal. And I'm telling you that people are not hesitant to reach out to who's writing your recommendation letter to verify that they actually mean those things, and it's not just like obliviously written by you.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, we've written recommendation letters when our provost writes recommendation letters or deans write recommendations. We've actually gotten calls from program directors verifying that, hey, are you really the dean of St. James, or did you really interact with the student, or did he just pay somebody to? So we definitely have experienced that. So please continue.
And then, your application should show that you're a well-rounded applicant. Because again, we can't gauge personality until you're interviewing with us already. But in order to make it on that table where you're a yes to an interview, your application needs to show personality. And what that means is that like, it has to be like, like you got to show that you did some research. You got to show that you like have some volunteer activities. You got to show that you're a human and you have hobbies. Like if it's just straight, like if your personal statement and your application is just, all I did in my life is study, you're probably not going to get on the table either.
Okay.
Because people are not interested in that. Like us as residents, when we see that coming through, we're like, that person's not going to fit in. Because that's not what we're all about, you know? Like there's so much more to life.
Right. No. And I'm assuming during residency, I mean, this goes...
The step score is just a cutoff.
Okay. What is the step score typically for a program like yours? What kind of a cutoff are you looking at? Is it really like, say, 260, or is it like, 220, like you said? What is kind of a ballpark?
Probably around 225. So
oh, wow. So that's really not an incredibly high cutoff either. Yeah, it's pretty. That's really amazing news, because a lot of students are, I got a 230. I don't think I'm even going to qualify for any kind of surgery.
Right, but let me refrain by saying that's the cutoff. But the majority of the people that we are interviewing are 240 or above, at least.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
But
essentially,
again, and this is like our program coordinator. So not one of the physicians, but the program coordinator who's shuffling through the scores. As a department, when we sit down and we review our applicants after we've interviewed them, not once have we talked about a step score being high or low
wow.
in terms of like ranking you.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And
So
I
that's
had a
basically the
follow-up
only person who's
question.
focusing on that step score. Mhm.
Is the program coordinator?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So one question I did have is, you mentioned that you kept calling your program coordinator regularly, and I get this question from students a lot. Is there such a thing as calling your program coordinator too much?
I think that there is such a thing as being annoying and being persistent. There's a
Okay.
difference.
Okay.
So
How would
gauge that
you
how you will.
differentiate that?
Um, Someone who's calling every day, when they've said that they'll call you back, you need to be patient about those things. I think, you should pick up from the tone of the program coordinator that you're talking to, because everyone's different. There were some program coordinators their tones were not as receptive, and I wasn't going to push with that, because if you do push with that, again, people talk. Like, in between programs, people talk too. So it's just not something you want to do. So you really just have to gauge the tone of the person that you're talking to.
Okay. And so that's a question that students ask all the time. Should I follow up? Should I follow up? I was like, yeah, within reason. But then also, the within reason is also such a relative term. I mean,
It's so
someone who's
relative. It's so relative.
yeah.
I think everything,
Um,
honestly, within the match itself is very relative.
right. I'm is with the pass fail, step one becoming pass fail from your end for the selection process, has anything changed?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that it's pass fail, we're focusing in terms of our cutoff. Before, our cutoff was solely focused on step one. And now the cutoff
Okay.
score that the program coordinator is looking at is step two. So we're not even considering step one at all. So that's
Oh,
what's
okay.
changed. It's just that our
So
focus just shifted.
so since you have been in such a competitive field, have you felt like you were treated any different or anything like that because you were from a Caribbean medical school after you got in?
No,
So
no,
nobody
nothing at
cares.
all. No, nobody cares.
Do you think program directors really understand the difference between the different Caribbean medical schools out there? Like St. James and Ross. I mean, every program director
No,
I've met, honestly, they don't really know the difference, or they don't even
no,
care,
they don't know.
even if they did know
No,
the
they don't
difference.
care. Yeah, they don't know and they don't care. And honestly, I
Okay.
think
So
like the
you,
more subspecialized that you get, I think that maybe
okay.
medicine program directors might care a little bit, because they probably see such an influx of students,
Okay.
and they kind of have more of a awareness. But the more
Okay.
subspecialized you get, they're like, oh, okay, you went to school in the Caribbean. Like, that's it. That's all they know.
So this brings me to my question, which it's very baffling to me. I don't really get that. So within Caribbean medical schools, I mean, it's every program director I've ever spoken to, every program director we've interviewed has clearly said that they don't really care if they're honestly from an IMG or not. If they have the scores, if they are a good person, they're the best fit for the role, they get the role. But what really baffles me is that within the Caribbean medical school realm, there are schools that charge north of $400,000. That's twice of what you would pay in a U.S. medical school. At St. James, you're paying less than half of that. I mean, less than half of what you would pay at a U.S. medical school, at 4 times less. So, what do you know why people would go and choose a school that's charging $300,000 to $400,000 in the Caribbean?
Because they
And
have that
basically get
misconception.
okay.
They have that
What do you think
misconception
that
that,
misconception?
so I can tell you this because I have friends that are, that went to those schools, and
Okay.
my own brother and my own cousin are actually with St. James. So even the younger generation, I kind of know a little bit more. But I think medical students or students coming into the Caribbean carry a misconception that these schools that are, you could say, more well known, carry a better result in terms of where you're going to be able to match and what rotations you're going to be able to do. So I think it's for that reason. And they think that the name carries a difference, right? Like in their minds, it's that, oh, Ross, everybody knows. So it's like going to like Stanford, but it's not really, because honestly, once you come back here, nobody knows or cares.
Right. Well, and that's very enlightening because, and that's what we always tell students. So the other interesting thing is, and this is a conversation that I've actually had with various physicians and actually uh, industry leaders, people who've become risen up through the ranks of various organizations that play a very important role in the medical industry, in medicine. And they have made an observation that a lot of the innovation and entrepreneurial drive that happens in the medical industry is largely from IMGs. And they made a very interesting comment that this entrepreneurial drive or this mindset is largely because IMGs come in with little to no debt. And whereas American educated physicians have a lot of debt, at an average, I believe the debt is north of between $300,000 to $400,000 that they're coming in with. If you post residency, when you start working, and this is, I think, normal human nature, if you have a huge $500,000 debt to pay off and you have nothing to pay off, your appetite for risk is much better when you have less debt. And that's why American physicians and people who come in with extremely large debt tend to be on the straight and narrow and are not necessarily innovating or not really, quote unquote, contributing in an innovative way to their particular practice. Whereas IMGs, especially in our case, students from St. James, where you're right now, the whole program costs about $100,000, like all 4 years. When you're coming out with that kind of with little to no debt, our students, and we've had several podcasts with them, that they worked for about 2 or 3 years. After that, they started their own practices. They started consulting firms that help them set up emergency room, go from hospital system to hospital system, setting up emergency rooms, developing geriatric practices, and all these. And all the industry practitioners say that the only reason IMGs tend to be better at doing this is because they have less of debt. I wanted to pick your brain a little bit and see what you thought of that. And I don't know if you would agree or disagree, especially since you're in such a specialized field.
So I don't know if it's the debt. I'm sure that has a part in it because, like you said, the less debt you have, the more likely you are to take a risk. But what I have observed and what I can say from my own experience is I think that going to a Caribbean medical school and being an IMG, when you come back, even in rotations, there is so much more hustle in our students that other students lack or just don't feel the need to show. And I think that that hustle kind of stays with you through rotations into residency and into your career and kind of just becomes a part of the nature of yourself, I guess, in your career. And I think that that's the reason why we are more innovative, because I think that, we come in with this concept that we have to prove ourselves to be as good, if not better, than everyone else around us. And I think that that kind of just stays with us and shows us that there's a lot you can do if you just, like put in that effort. And I mean, like personally, like I'll say too that like I think throughout residency, I've been involved in projects that most people wouldn't think of, or like innovative projects, as you can say, kind of like on the outskirts of research. Nothing that I feel comfortable just talking about yet, but I think that when I look into myself, I think a lot of that comes from the fact that like I just got so used to being able to handle and juggle all of those things outside of just being a student or being a resident. And with that, your brain's working in multiple ways and you kind of just get used to it. And so I personally think that that's where that innovation is coming from, because you just have that drive that other people don't.
No, that's a very, very interesting perspective. So, so basically, we're almost coming to the end of our time, but to sum up your journey, I mean, you've obviously worked hard, kept your grades up, and basically didn't listen to naysayers and followed your passion. And that's what led you to where you are. Is that accurate summation of your experiences?
Yeah, I think that would be a good description.
But that's amazing. And this is exactly what not just our students but all IMGs need to hear, because I feel like IMGs get into the residency or the match process with such a chip on their shoulders. And I personally think that is so inaccurate, because I've dealt with a lot of physicians and I've dealt with a lot of American students as well. As an administrator, I'm not a physician. But I personally see kind of what you just said, that students, at least at St. James, are definitely a cut above, because they are working hard. They are already experiencing a culture and a livelihood and a lifestyle in a different country. They're already providing care through our health fairs and all the free clinics and things like that we do in these countries. They're already providing a certain level of care, and they're bringing that experience and those learnings into their rotations and then eventually into their practices. So I personally think, and obviously I will be biased here a little bit, but our students definitely have a lot more to offer than most US students, in my opinion, because US students don't really, I've met a lot of American students who haven't had the opportunity to go outside of their own country for anything really. Like even for vacations, they've been few and far between because doctors are very busy. I get it. But that opportunity of going out and studying, I think that is what is really, to your point, increasing their innovation, because it's an adaptation going to a different country and living there.
I mean, it definitely shapes a lot of your personality, going out into a country kind of by yourself. And typically most people aren't coming with a spouse or significant other or family members, and are, having to go out and get that experience of living in a different country where you literally don't know anybody and you have to make it through school. So I think that definitely shapes a lot of who you are.
Right. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Hasnie, and giving us those wonderful insights. It was really eye-opening about how really specialized program directors and residency programs really select, but what they're really focusing on is not your scores, not your how well you did in school. What they're focusing on is the person. That's very, very insightful. But again, thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Hasnie, and for all of our viewers, do not forget to follow us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, as well as Google, and any other formats that you download your podcasts from. Again, we're Med School Minutes, and always remember, there's no shortcut to becoming an MD.
Thank you so much for tuning into our show. We hope you enjoyed another episode of Med School Minutes. If you like our content, please follow us and receive notification when a new show is posted. This podcast is brought to you by St. James School of Medicine. For a video version of this podcast, please check us out on sjsm.org/video.